The wind carried the dust like memory through the crooked streets of Dry Creek that morning, brushing against faded curtains and cracked shutters as though the town itself were whispering gossip. At the edge of the main road stood a wagon, its wheels creaking under the weight of silence. A young woman of 21 stood beside it, barefoot, slender, her dress too thin for the cold wind. Her eyes, the color of rain-soaked soil, were fixed on the horizon, where freedom and despair blurred together. Behind her, a man's voice, sharp, her father's, spoke to a trader about the price of cattle and disappointment, and somewhere in that transaction, her name was included. He called her Barren. The word fell like a hammer. The men standing nearby did not look at her, but their smirks were heavy enough to feel. Her mother turned away, arms crossed, pretending to adjust her shawl. A coin exchanged hands. That was the sound of her worth. She climbed into the wagon without a word, her face pale but dry-eyed. The driver, a ranch hand with sunburned cheeks, avoided meeting her gaze. The road stretched wide and empty, the sun rising like a tired promise. Every turn of the wheel carried her farther from a family that never wanted her, yet she still felt their shadows clinging to her skin. For miles, the plains rolled open like pages of an old book. The air was heavy with sagebrush and old sorrow. She thought of the man who once swore he'd love her forever, until the winter took their stillborn child. He never came back. He told her it wasn't her fault, but his eyes said otherwise. After that, her family whispered that she'd cursed their house. By spring, they no longer said her name at all. The wagon jolted over a rut, and she held onto the edge, her knuckles white. She tried to remember what hope had felt like, when she believed her hands could still create something beautiful. But now her palms were raw from scrubbing, her voice hoarse from silence. All that remained of her was endurance. The driver cleared his throat softly. "You'll be working for Mr. Cade," he said, his tone cautious, as if the name carried weight. "Lost his wife 3 years back. Keeps to himself. Big ranch, quiet land." She nodded, eyes forward. "Does he know about me?" The driver hesitated. "He don't ask questions. That's why most folk don't last long there." She turned her face toward the wind. Maybe that was best. If he didn't ask, she wouldn't have to tell. The truth was a burden she was tired of carrying. By sundown, the wagon reached Cade Ranch, a wide stretch of gold and rust beneath a blood-orange sky. The main house stood firm against the wind, built of weathered timber and silence. A few horses grazed near the fence, their manes glinting in the fading light. A man stood by the corral, tall and broad-shouldered, his shirt sleeves rolled, his hand steady on the gate. He looked up as they arrived. Even from a distance, there was something about him, an air of quiet gravity, like the earth itself had chosen him to hold it still. His hair was dark, his face sun-carved and strong, yet his eyes held the kind of stillness that came only from loss. The driver hopped down first. "Brought the girl, sir." The rancher nodded once, gaze steady. "Name?" She hesitated. "Lena." The word felt smaller than herself. He studied her, without judgment, just observation, the way one might watch the weather before deciding whether to sow. "There's a room by the kitchen," he said. "You'll start early. Mrs. Torres runs the house. She'll show you what's needed." No welcome, no cruelty. Just calm acceptance. It was more mercy than she'd had in years. Mrs. Torres, a round woman with kind eyes, guided her inside. The air smelled of coffee and dust, wood smoke and loneliness. The walls bore faint marks of another woman's touch, faded curtains, a forgotten shawl draped over a chair. In the corner hung a photograph of a smiling lady with a baby she never lived to hold. That night, Lena washed at the basin until her fingers turned red, the water clouded with dirt and memory. Outside, she heard Cade's boots cross the porch, then the creak of a rocking chair. She imagined him staring into the distance, listening to the same coyotes that howled in her own chest. Sleep came slow. She lay on a narrow cot near the fire, tracing the cracks in the ceiling like constellations. The walls whispered with the sound of wind sliding through chinks, like soft voices calling her name. She wondered what kind of man built a life so wide yet lived so alone. In the days that followed, she learned the rhythm of the ranch. Dawn came pale and cold. She carried buckets, fed chickens, mended torn saddles. Cade spoke little, but his silence was never cruel. Once, she dropped a pail in the yard and flinched, expecting a shout. Instead, he picked it up beside her, steady and wordless, as if saying that mistakes didn't need punishment here. At night, she'd see him through the window, sitting by the fire with his hat on his knee, staring into the flames as if searching for something he'd buried there. Sometimes their eyes met through the glass. Neither looked away. Mrs. Torres told her one evening, while kneading dough, that his wife and child had died of fever the winter before. Since then, he don't speak of love nor loss, she said softly. Just works and listens to the land. Lena nodded, though her throat ached. She understood that kind of silence, the kind that swallows a person whole. A week later, a storm rolled in without warning. Thunder cracked the horizon. Lena rushed outside to pull the laundry from the line, her hair whipping around her face. The rain came fierce and cold. Cade appeared suddenly beside her, helping gather the sheets, his hands rough but sure. When the wind tore one loose, they both reached for it at once. Their fingers brushed. For a moment, the rain slowed. The air between them changed. Something fragile and unspoken flickered. Then he stepped back, jaw tight, eyes unreadable. "You should get inside," he said. She obeyed, heart pounding. Later that night, she sat by the hearth, her dress still damp, staring at the fire. Mrs. Torres had gone to bed. The house was quiet. She could hear Cade outside, his boots pacing the porch. She didn't know why the sound steadied her, only that it did. When the flames began to die, she reached out a trembling hand and whispered, "Maybe peace doesn't need love to begin. Maybe kindness is enough." At that moment, the door creaked open. Cade stood there, rain dripping from his hat, his eyes fixed on her as if he'd heard every word. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The wind howled through the doorway, scattering sparks across the floor. Then softly he said, "Kindness is where love learns to breathe." And before she could speak, he turned and vanished into the storm, leaving her staring after him, with something warm and terrifying waking in her chest. The days after the storm unfolded like pages turning themselves. The earth was washed clean, the grass greener, the air softer. Lena rose before dawn, the sky still painted with ash-blue clouds. She moved through the quiet house like a ghost of purpose, each motion small and deliberate. Cade's boots rested by the door. The sight of them filled her with something she didn't have a name for, comfort, perhaps, or the ache of belonging she had long forgotten. She worked beside Mrs. Torres in the kitchen, the scent of fresh bread and coffee filling the air. From the window, she could see Cade walking the fence line, his figure cut sharp against the morning mist. He moved with the rhythm of the land, a man who did not rush, who spoke to silence as if it were a friend. Sometimes she thought he was talking to someone she couldn't see, someone buried in the wind. When he returned, their eyes would meet briefly. He'd nod, offer a quiet greeting, and she'd return it with a soft smile. Those exchanges, small as they were, became the pulse of her days. She found herself waiting for them, measuring time by his presence. One afternoon, while gathering firewood, she found him near the barn repairing a broken gate. The sun hung low, gold spilling over his shoulders. She hesitated, then knelt beside him, holding the boards in place while he hammered the nails. Their hands brushed once, twice, simple accidents, but each touch left her breath shorter. "You work hard," he said finally, voice low. "I try," she replied. "It helps to keep busy." He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "You don't have to prove anything here." Her chest tightened. "I've been proving things all my life, Mr. Cade. It's hard to stop." He looked at her then, not with pity, but understanding. "You can call me Aaron," he said quietly, returning to his work. The sound of her name on his lips that evening lingered long after the sun dipped behind the hills. Nights came softer after that. Sometimes, after supper, Cade would stay near the fire while she mended shirts or read old letters Mrs. Torres lent her. They spoke in fragments, about the weather, the crops, the way the coyotes howled differently depending on the moon. But beneath the small talk, something unspoken pulsed, a fragile bridge between two lives marked by loss. Mrs. Torres saw it before they did. One evening, while washing dishes, she said gently, "You're bringing warmth back into this place, Nina. That man's heart's been winter for too long." Lena smiled faintly, though her hands trembled in the water. "He's kind, that's all." "Kind men are rare," Mrs. Torres replied. "Don't mistake quiet for emptiness. Sometimes it's the sound of a man learning how to breathe again." Later that week, a mare went into labor before dawn. Lena heard the commotion first and ran to the barn, nightgown tucked into her boots. Cade was already there, sleeves rolled, sweat glistening on his brow. The mare was struggling, kicking at the straw, breath ragged. Together they worked in silence, his strength steady, her touch gentle. When the foal was finally born, small and trembling, the mare turned away, too weak to nurse. Lena knelt beside the foal, whispering soft words, pressing milk to its lips with her hand. The little creature fought for breath, and so did she. Cade watched her in the half-light, her face streaked with tears she didn't notice. "You care too much," he said softly. "Someone has to," she murmured. He crouched beside her. "The world's been cruel to you." She smiled faintly. "The world doesn't notice me enough to be cruel." His jaw tightened, the muscle twitching. "They called you Barren, didn't they?" The words hit her like a slap, not from cruelty but from truth. Her hand froze on the foal's head. "Yes," she whispered. "That's why I was sold. I can't have children. It's easier for everyone to pretend I'm broken." He was silent a long moment, the rain still dripping from the roof. Finally he said, "You're not broken, Lena." His voice was firm, deep, and certain. "You're the only one here who still remembers how to care for something fragile." She blinked hard, the world blurring. "You don't have to say that." "I don't say what I don't mean," he answered. The foal stirred then, pressing weakly against her hand, a shudder of life that felt like a heartbeat shared. She smiled through her tears. "Maybe it'll live after all." He looked at her, eyes softening. "Maybe that's because of you." They stayed there until the sky paled, two souls sitting among hay and moonlight, the scent of new life in the air. After that night, something invisible but real shifted between them. He began to wait for her at the porch in the mornings, sometimes offering her coffee, sometimes just silence. She found small notes left on the table, short reminders or simple thank yous written in careful handwriting. They never spoke of what happened in the barn, but it lingered between them like the warmth after firelight fades. One evening, he brought her a small carved wooden horse, rough and unfinished. "It was my wife's idea," he said quietly. "She wanted a set of these for the children we never had." Lena traced the carving with her fingers. "It's beautiful." He gave a faint smile. "I stopped carving after she passed. Didn't think my hands remembered how." She looked up, eyes glistening. "You remembered now." He met her gaze, something raw flickering there. "Maybe you reminded me." Outside, the wind stirred the dry grass, the smell of rain in the distance. She wanted to tell him what his kindness meant, how every small gesture stitched pieces of her together again, but words felt too fragile. Instead, she just whispered, "Thank you for letting me stay." He hesitated, then said, "You don't have to thank me. This place, it's better with you in it." Mrs. Torres passed by the doorway then, pretending not to notice, but her knowing smile lingered in the air like a blessing. Days grew longer, their connection deeper in ways neither could name. She found herself laughing once, a soft sound she didn't recognize. He looked up from his work, startled, then smiled, a rare, unguarded thing. For the first time, she saw not the widowed rancher, but the man beneath, strong yet deeply human. That night, as she sat by the fire, Cade came to the doorway, hesitant. "Lena," he said, voice low, "about that night in the barn." She looked up, heart thudding. "I meant what I said. I don't need children. I just need—" He stopped, the words caught in his throat. Then he turned, retreating into the dark. The door closed softly behind him. She sat frozen, the flames trembling across her face. For a moment, she thought she'd imagined it all. But then she noticed something. His coat, left hanging by the door, dripping rain onto the floorboards. He had walked into the storm without it, and somehow, that said everything he couldn't bring himself to say. Morning broke with a tender calm, the sky washed in rose and gold. Lena stepped outside, the grass damp beneath her bare feet, and watched the sun spill over the hills. The ranch was quiet except for the soft snort of horses and the creak of a windmill turning slow. Cade's coat still hung by the door where he had left it, untouched since the night he walked into the rain. She'd waited for him to speak, to finish the words that trembled between them, but he hadn't. He'd gone about his work with his usual calm, yet something in his eyes had shifted, like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, afraid of both the fall and the flight. That morning, he found her by the corral, brushing down the mare who had given birth weeks ago. The foal, now stronger, trotted nearby, playful and alive. "She's healing," Lena said quietly, running a hand along the mare's neck. "Didn't think she would." Cade leaned on the fence, sunlight catching the curve of his jaw. "Maybe some things just need time," he said, "or someone patient enough not to give up." Their eyes met briefly before she looked away, her heart unsteady. She wanted to speak, to ask what he had meant that night, but the words lodged in her throat. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was alive with everything unspoken. In the days that followed, spring came in full bloom. The land brightened, flowers rose from the hard soil, and laughter began to return to the ranch. Even Mrs. Torres noticed. "He smiles again," she told Lena with a grin. "And you hum when you work. I think the ghosts are finally resting." Lena smiled, but deep inside, she knew the past never rested. It only learned to whisper quieter. Still, there was something about this new season that felt different, like the earth itself was daring her to believe in happiness again. One afternoon, Cade asked her to ride with him. She hesitated only for a moment before agreeing. They saddled the horses and rode out across the fields, the horizon wide and endless. The air smelled of wildflowers and distant rain. She hadn't ridden in years, but the motion felt natural, freeing. Cade rode beside her, his expression softer than she'd ever seen. After an hour, they stopped beneath a great cottonwood tree by the river. Its leaves shimmered like coins in the wind. Cade dismounted first and helped her down, his hands warm around hers. For a moment, he didn't let go. "This tree," he said quietly, looking up into the branches, "was where my wife used to sit. She'd talk about the family we'd have here someday." He paused, his voice low and steady. "When she and the baby died, I stopped coming. Couldn't stand to see it." Lena stood beside him, the river's song filling the silence. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded. "You don't need to be. Life doesn't ask if we're ready to lose things." His gaze shifted to her then, searching, almost afraid. "But it does ask if we're brave enough to love again." Her breath caught. "Kate," he took a step closer, the sunlight flickering across his face. "That night in the barn," he said, voice trembling just enough to betray him. "I meant what I said. I don't need children, Lena. I need you." The world seemed to still around them. The wind slowed. Even the river seemed to hold its breath. She felt the words sink deep, soft and terrifying. "You don't mean that," she whispered, though her heart begged him to. "You deserve a future, someone who can give you what she couldn't." He shook his head. "You think love is measured by what's given. It's measured by what stays. You stayed. Through silence, through storms. You remind me what living feels like." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't know how to be what you need." He smiled faintly, touching her hand. "You already are." The moment stretched long, sacred. The river whispered. The wind tangled her hair against his chest. She wanted to believe him, to step into that fragile promise, but fear still clung like a shadow. They rode back in silence, the distance between them filled with everything left unsaid. When they reached the ranch, Cade helped her down again, his touch gentle but restrained. As she turned to go inside, he caught her wrist, his thumb brushing the pulse beneath her skin. "Lena," he said softly, "tomorrow the town's holding an auction. I'll be there. Come with me." She hesitated. "People talk." "Let them." His eyes held hers with quiet defiance. Maybe it's time we stop hiding from what's true. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, the sound of crickets rising through the open window. Part of her wanted to run, to protect the fragile peace she'd found. But another part, braver and more desperate, wanted to be seen, truly seen, for once in her life. When dawn came, she dressed carefully, smoothing the simple blue dress Mrs. Torres had pressed for her. As she stepped outside, Cade was waiting by the wagon, freshly shaven, his hat in his hands. The look he gave her was quiet but full of meaning, as if seeing her completed something unfinished in him. The ride to town was long, the road winding through sunlit fields. People turned to stare when they arrived. Whispers fluttered through the crowd, like startled birds. "That's her," someone muttered. "The Barren one." Cade heard it. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he reached for her hand as they stepped down together. The gesture was simple, but in that moment, it felt like a declaration. Inside the auction hall, men traded horses and cattle, their laughter loud and careless. When Cade entered, the room quieted. He led Lena to the front, his hand never leaving hers. A voice from the back sneered. "Didn't think a man like Cade would marry a woman who can't give him heirs." The words sliced through the air. Lena froze, every instinct urging her to pull away. But Cade turned slowly, his voice calm, steady, commanding. "She's not barren," he said, his gaze sweeping across the room. "She's the reason this land breathes again. She's the only thing that's made this place feel alive." The silence that followed was heavy, reverent. Even the auctioneer lowered his head. Lena's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. He had spoken the truth she never dared believe, that her worth wasn't in what she could give, but in who she was. When they stepped outside, the sky had deepened into gold. Cade turned to her, eyes bright. "Come back with me," he said. "Not as my worker, as my wife." For a heartbeat, she couldn't move. Then, through the blur of tears, she nodded. Yes. Back at the ranch, they stood beneath the cottonwood tree, the same one that had once been a monument to loss. Now it bore witness to beginning. Mrs. Torres stood nearby, smiling through her tears. The foal grazed quietly in the field beyond. As Cade slipped a simple ring onto her finger, Lena felt something break open inside her, not pain, not fear, but release. The ghosts of her past fell silent, and as they kissed beneath the trembling leaves, the wind carried their promise across the valley. Two hearts choosing not what the world demanded, but what love itself allowed.